Welcome to the Big Seance Podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance.
Hey, Paranerds. Happy September. You know, my husband from time to time will bring authors or content creators to my attention. People he thinks would resonate with you, my Paranerd friends. Well, this was the case when he showed me the TikTok feed of a Nurse Hadley. He told me how she's a hospice nurse who has great stories of working with her patients, how her work has convinced her that there's an afterlife, and that she has over 1.5 million followers. And I'm thinking, how did I not know about Nurse Hadley? Well, I saw she just recently authored a book, and so I rushed it to my doorstep. It's called The In-Between: Unforgettable Encounters During Life's Final Moments. And it's a New York Times bestseller. Well, when I posted the photo of the book, as I do with all other books that land on my doorstep, it sparked so much discussion. So many people wanted to talk about it or get their hands on the book. The next day, I shared an article I originally saw shared by Amy Bruni. It was from Insider.com, and it's an essay featuring a doctor named Jeffrey Long. It's titled, "I've studied more than 5,000 near-death experiences. My research has convinced me without a doubt that there's life after death." Again, that article, it sparked a lot of discussion and interest. So I took the hint, y'all. Next week, I am excited to share the interview that I just finished recording with Nurse Hadley Vlahos, author of The In-Between. And I'm so glad I reached out and got to connect with her. She is truly a special person, and I think you're going to love every second of it. So while I'm preparing that interview for next week, I figured I'd warm you up with a look back at two different related episodes, both from 2017. These are just some highlights. So if you want to check out the full episodes, I'll put those links in the show notes at BigSeance.com. First up, highlights from episode 106, Physicians Untold Stories with Dr. Scott J. Kolbaba. Then, highlights from episode 110, Grief Dreams with Joshua Black. You'll hear my super old outro music at one point in the background in the middle of this episode, but don't be startled because the episode keeps going after that. It was nice to hear it though, oddly, because I always really liked that theme. I missed it. I'll also bring our friend the Crow in to let you know occasionally when a new clip is starting. So, do you want to pour the tea twice today? Yeah, let's do that. Thanks for being here, y'all. Dr. Kolbaba is an internist in private practice in Wheaton, Illinois. He graduated from the University of Illinois College of Medicine with honors and did his residency at Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center in Chicago and at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He's been awarded membership in the Alpha Omega Alpha Honor Medical Society and has been featured in Chicago Magazine as a top doctor in internal medicine. Being an only child, he now has a family of 7 children. His other passions include his Newfoundland puppy, already 130 pounds, and flying kites. That part cracks me up. I love that. He has also grown Atlantic giant pumpkins and is the proud winner of the Sycamore, Illinois Pumpkin Growing Contest 2 years running. And I know he loves October, and I love October. We just mentioned that before we recorded, so that's a perfect hobby for that. Like many of his friends, Dr. Kolbaba considers himself a card-carrying do-gooder. His family helps support an orphanage in Romania, supervised by REMM, which is Romanian Evangelical Medical Mission, where they adopted 2 of their children. His ultimate goal is to provide enough support to help many more orphans and street children. And we're here to talk today about his book, which is titled Physicians Untold Stories, Miraculous Experiences Doctors Are Hesitant to Share with Their Patients or Anyone. And I had a chance to read this book. I finished it a couple of weeks ago, and I loved it. His website is physiciansuntoldsstories.com. Welcome to the Big Seance Parlor, Dr. Kolbaba.
Thanks, Patrick. It's great to be here.
I have to open with this so listeners know. I have a Facebook group for listeners of the podcast. It's the Big Seance Parlor on Facebook. And, occasionally I'll let people know who I'm getting ready to interview and ask if they have any questions that they're curious about. And sometimes a few people will submit a question, and sometimes I don't get any response. Well, I shared Dr. Kolbaba's book cover, I think the Amazon link, and I let them know that I was interviewing him today. And the questions just kept pouring in. Maybe other than a Ouija seance that we had like a year ago, I think it's actually the most response I've had with questions. So they've actually kind of done all the prep work for me today. So it made it easy, and people are clearly interested in this topic.
That's great.
So can you first just talk to us about the process that you went through to find people in your profession who were willing to talk about this, and how long did that take?
Well, first of all, doctors never talk about this stuff. This is kind of a taboo because no doctor wants to feel like he's strange or like he's had a dream or something that led him to a diagnosis, or that he saw a vision or an angel or something. That would be, the doctors that I'm hanging out with here are pretty ordinary, normal doctors that have regular practices that they don't want to sacrifice. And I think the thinking is that if you come out with a story, like some of the stories that I was able to collect, that your practice will suffer because people will think you're a strange doctor. Well, fortunately, it didn't turn out that way. And I was actually very surprised that the doctors came forward with some of these stories. And how it started, Patrick, was that I had a few strange experiences myself with things that I just couldn't explain. And I thought, boy, this is a little, I don't know, I've never had anything like this happen before. And on the heels of that, then a doctor came up to me on the ward, the hospital ward, grabbed me by the arm and said, "Scott, I've got this incredible story I want to tell you." I said, "Well, go ahead and tell it to me." This is Dave Mokel, my friend, orthopedic surgeon. He said, "Well, I can't tell it to you here." And I said, "Well, why not, Dave?" And he said, "Well, somebody might hear me." So I said, "Okay, let's go into empty patient room. We'll close the door." And he told me an amazing story about a near-death experience with a patient of his that arrested on the operating room table. And while she was basically clinically dead, she said she rose up to the top of the room and was able to visualize everything that had happened, including Dr. Mokel pushing one of the aides with red hair aside because he wasn't doing CPR adequately enough. And while she was there, she said that she was able to see her long-deceased grandmother, who came to her and told her that she would have a special place for her in heaven if she was good and kind. And before this, Mary, who was a patient that had arrested, was kind of a curmudgeon. She was the kind of a person you'd never wanted to see in the office. She'd never had anything good to say. You always did something wrong. And afterwards, she was the most kind and considerate person. So when she told him about this experience after she had come to, and a couple of days later, Dr. Mokel just didn't know what to say. He'd never experienced anything like this before. And I said, "Dave, who did you tell this story to?" And he said, "Well, no one. I just told it to my wife, and you're the first person I've ever told it to." So doctors don't tell these kinds of things very readily. So his was the first story that I collected, and I thought this was an amazing story. And then after that, there was another story that just came to me. I think out of coincidence, your viewers will probably realize that these coincidences probably weren't coincidental at all. I was kind of led down the rosy path here to write a book. And so a couple of my experiences, a couple of doctor experiences. And then I thought, boy, these are really moving stories. I wonder if it would make a good book. And so I happened to be looking at Ben Carson's website because I thought Ben Carson would be a great person to get a story from. And on his website, just out of coincidence, there was a picture of Scott McDonald, who was my patient. I thought, why is Scott McDonald on Ben Carson's website? What a coincidence again. And Scott McDonald's a publisher. He published Ben Carson's books. He's a president of a publishing house. So I called Scott and I said, can we meet for lunch? I've got a few stories that doctors have told me. I don't know if they're worth anything, but I'd like you to maybe, you're an expert, you're a publisher, listen to these stories and see what you think. So we had lunch, and I was really hungry and eating quickly, and he was listening to the stories, and all of a sudden, I realized he had stopped eating. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. So I looked up. He had tears in his eyes. And that's when I realized that these were moving stories. And he said, you have to publish this book. You have to get more stories. So getting back to your original question, Patrick, how did I get other stories? Then I decided to hang out at the doctor's lounge early in the morning. The doctor's lounge has wonderful things like donuts and coffee that all the doctors like to come and get there in the morning. And there is some fruit and good stuff there, too, which is mostly ignored. And so I'd ask the doctor, any doctor coming through, hey, do you have any stories? I'm doing a book. So I committed myself to doing a book. I said, I'm going to do a book, so I wouldn't back out. And I'd embarrass myself if I decided not to. And so I'd say to the doctor, do you have any stories that you can't explain medically? And lots of doctors did. I was surprised that they actually told them to me. And after they did, I'd say, well, let me jot some notes down, but give me your phone number. I'll call you tonight or tomorrow night or whenever, and then we'll get the details of the story. I went through probably 200 doctors doing this process. And the stories that I included, I heard lots of stories. I heard probably hundreds of stories, but the stories that I included had to give me goosebumps or make me cry out of emotion. And if I sat there in the morning listening to this story and I had tears in my eyes, I knew that was a good story.
Wow. And
so that's how I boiled it down to about 25, 26 stories that I decided to include in the book. And this process was supposed to take about 6 months. Well, after 4 years of struggling and writing, I finally got the book out. But it took me a long time to get this done. But lots of funny coincidences, lots of strange coincidences happened along the way, like those with the book publisher and doctors just happened to come to me with some stories. So that's a long answer to a short question.
No, that's great. Do you ever get criticism or eye rolls from your peers?
I thought I would. I thought I'd get lots of criticism because these stories are really strange. These stories are ghosts and premonitions and dreams. And I just included, I didn't have, there was no specific selection of the stories. The stories that moved me and touched my heart were the ones I included. So there are a whole host of all kinds of things. And I thought, I'm going to get all kinds of criticism. My patients are going to stop seeing me because they think I'm going to be a strange person. And I thought the doctors, too, would get that. I was afraid for the doctors. But the thing that happened was so unusual. We had a launch. We launched the book about a year ago. And at the launch, lots of the doctors showed up. And the response from the people that were there, my patients, their patients, people from the community, was incredible. It was so positive. And I think it was. I thought about this because I thought we're going to get all kinds of criticism for this kind of thing and eyes rolling and so forth. There was none of that. Everyone was so positive. They were saying, thank you for coming out with these stories because now I feel that the story that I have, I can tell without feeling embarrassment. And I think what happened is that everyone has stories. Every family or every individual has an unusual circumstance in their life. And I think this book and these stories have allowed them permission to tell their story. Because if these doctors can tell these unusual stories, maybe my story is valid too, and maybe it's okay for me to tell it. And I've heard lots of stories from my patients and from lots of people. Honestly, Patrick, I've had no criticism at all, and that shocks me. I would think I'd have all kinds of criticism, but I had none. The doctors that have shared these stories have had nothing but praise, and it's really gratifying to see that. So I was wrong. I thought I'd be defending myself against all kinds of slings and arrows, but that hasn't happened.
Do you think that maybe we're just finally getting to a time where this overly critical, scientific, skeptical barrier is kind of being lifted? Do you think the tides are turning a little bit?
I think it is. I think people are more open to things that you can't explain. the divine, whatever you want to call it. And I wasn't very preachy at all with the book. I just told stories. And so I didn't tell people what it is that was happening here. I just let them decide for themselves what it was. But I think the tide is turning. I think people are realizing there is something else out there, and that if you believe in God, that there is a God that helps us and loves us unconditionally and directs our path, and that people that have passed on really can know what we're doing in our life and sometimes intervene in unusual and strange ways in certain circumstances.
You were talking about some of the stories, and the ones that moved me the most, I realized, were like you had several international stories where there were doctors that went to communities in need, including the Philippines and Ethiopia. And
yes,
some of those really touched me, especially now with hurricanes affecting communities and what we're seeing in that light in the news and everything, and
sure.
And really feeling so much empathy for those folks. And I know that's a little different, but those stories I thought were really, really good and really affected me. Were there any of those that you wanted to share?
Oh, absolutely. What I learned before I shared one of those stories was that I learned a lot about doctors when I interviewed doctors, because doctors are very superficial with each other. We talk about serum potassium levels, and we talk about the next gallbladder we're going to take out, and how someone died, and those kinds of the medical things. But we rarely talk about these kinds of stories, and we also rarely talk about what makes a doctor tick. Why did you go into medicine? What wakes you up in the morning and makes you get out of bed and gives you the juice that makes your day go along? And so after talking with a lot of these doctors, I realized that most doctors are what I coined a term, sappy do-gooders. So I thought most doctors are just sappy do-gooders. They want to do good in the world. They want to cure cancer. They want to help someone every single day. And so it's not unusual for doctors to go on medical missions and to help people. The one particular story is about Mike Hussey, is a gynecologist. He actually delivered my fourth son, Ian. And Ian's still up talking and walking, so he did a good job delivering him. And so Mike is a believer that he was given a gift to be able to become a doctor, and he feels that he needs to share that gift as much as he can. So every year he goes on a medical mission. And he's a gynecologist, so he does surgeries. And the group that sends him out tries to send these doctors, they all get together, to a place that is the poorest of the poor. And the one place that they went to this particular year was the Philippines. And they went to one of the outer islands of the Philippines, where there was a tiny little hospital of 8 beds, and he was operating at that hospital. And there were no nurses. There were just some techs that helped him out with his surgery. And the instruments he used were instruments that they had, and some of the ones he brought, which were from the 60s. But they were still instruments that would work. They're just not quite as sophisticated as what we have.
And he was the only doctor there, correct?
He was the only doctor there at that particular hospital at this time. There were a couple other doctors that were in and out, and there were about 30 doctors that went on the trip, but they all went to different hospitals in different locations. So he was there at this little hospital, and when the doctors come, the patients, the Philippine people, line up for blocks to see these doctors, because they know that they can't afford to have any surgeries by themselves. So the only way they can get surgery is to have these American doctors do surgery, because once they go, they're stuck for the rest of the year. So this one particular woman had she looked like she was pregnant. She had some tumors in her uterus, but they didn't have any equipment to diagnose what she had, so they just knew she had a very large uterus for the last couple of years, and Dr. Hussey decided to operate on her to remove this, because it was very difficult for her to get around with this very large tumor in her abdomen. So he started to operate on her, and in the operating room, it's not uncommon that the lights go out. They just move the operating table over to the window where they can see, and they were doing that back and forth. And when he got in, he realized that this was a very difficult case, because the uterus was all matted down with scar tissue. Over the years, scar tissue had grown in. And normally what you do, evidently, I'm not a surgeon, but what Dr. Hussey told me is they lift the uterus up, tie off the blood vessels underneath the uterus so that they can stop the bleeding, and then they finish the surgery. Well, this particular case, they had some bleeding, but they couldn't lift the uterus up because it was so matted down. So he found himself with a woman who has her belly open. She's bleeding more and more and more, and he can't stop the bleeding. Well, he wanted to, normally you'd call to the blood bank, send me a couple units of old negative blood or whatever. And he couldn't do that because there was no blood bank. The nearest blood bank was 25 miles away. So here he is, a woman's bleeding to death, literally in front of him. Everyone in the operating room becomes silent because in situations like this, no one makes eye contact. Everyone becomes silent because they know this is a life-threatening situation that's happening right in front of them. This is a young lady that they're going to lose, that she's going to die. And she's bleeding more and more, and he can't stop the bleeding. He can't cauterize enough blood vessels. He can't lift the uterus up. And so he becomes so desperate that he reaches for the only thing that he can do, and that is he closes his eyes, he folds his hands, and he says a prayer. Heavenly Father, this is not my patient, it's your patient. You are the master healer. Please take over. He opened his eyes. Everything suddenly was accessible. The uterus was freed up. He was able to lift the uterus up, tie off the blood vessels. The bleeding stopped. He finished the surgery, and she lived. And so afterwards, he obviously was very thankful and said a prayer of thanksgiving. The next day, he saw the woman that he operated on. She was perfectly fine, a little pale from blood loss, but she was fine. And she said that she had said a prayer for him also, thanking him for doing that surgery. So that was something that Dr. Hussey said he would never forget all his life. A little hospital, 8-bed hospital off of nowhere, with no nurses, no blood bank, and only God to call on to help. And he says that he was given help that day.
The stress and the pressure of knowing that it's just you and everybody is looking to you. I can't imagine that at all. That's just, sometimes I feel a little bit like that when I'm standing in the middle of 60 middle school kids since I'm a teacher.
Yes.
But, it's not life-threatening.
Well, this was something that he knew she was dying, literally, on this. Yeah. And she was a beautiful young girl and a young lady. And he was responsible. He was in charge. And if he lost her, he would be the one that would have to face that the rest of his life. So,
and then no matter what happened, move on to the next patient waiting out in the line. That's crazy.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
So I guess after I bragged about having all these questions submitted to me, I should get to some of these questions.
Okay.
Linda asks, and side note, full disclosure, Linda is my mom. Linda asks, hospitals are supposed to be one of the top places for spirits to be. Have you ever seen or felt a spirit in the hospital?
I don't think I've not seen a spirit in the hospital. Some of the doctors have stories about spirits in the hospital. Lots of the nurses have stories in the ICU about spirits in the hospital. That's not been a thing I've experienced, but I think that you're so close to the hereafter sometimes in the hospital that's where you might experience some spirits. The one story I told about Dr. Mokel and the woman that rose to the top of the room, the spirit of her grandmother came to visit her. And there was another interesting story from Noemi Sigelov, who's a general surgeon, that was taking care of a missionary couple, actually two physicians that were missionaries in Africa. She was taking care of them for a long time. And they were trying to tell her that she needs to become more spiritual and more religious. And finally, one of the last visits that they had, because the woman was cured and Dr. Sigelov had operated on her and she was fine, and it was the last visit, the fellow said, I'm going to show you someday that there is life after death, that there is something to the hereafter. And she said, that's fine. That was okay. So a number of years later, Dr. Sigelov was taking a vacation and she had to be on call the night before. And invariably, when you're on call, something disastrous comes in and she had to do an emergency surgery in the middle of the night. She finished and then had to make early morning rounds before her flight left for Tucson. And as she's walking to the hospital, there was a puff of air as she opened the doors. You know how sometimes there's a different pressure. And all of a sudden she saw in front of her this missionary, the man that had said to her, I'm going to show you that there is a life hereafter. He was all dressed in white. He didn't say anything. He just simply smiled. And the smile, she said, was that of a person that had accomplished a major missionary goal in his life, that kind of satisfied smile. And she thought that was kind of interesting. And she said, hi there. And she scared herself because she didn't realize that she had actually said something. She looked around to make sure no one saw her because there was no one there. And then this vision disappeared. She went on her rounds, made her plane, got to Tucson, where she shut off all of her phones and emails and so forth for 3 days. And then as she's going back to Chicago, she decided to check her email and all of her messages. And in the email was a message from the vice president of the hospital and said, "I'm sorry to inform you that the individual that she had been taking care of, the fellow, had died the morning that she had made rounds. He died at 2:30 a.m., and she made rounds at 4:30. And she was shocked. She got goosebumps all of a sudden to realize that he had died hours before he appeared to her to show her that there was life after death."
I'm just sitting here. We're talking about synchronicities, and you had mentioned a puff of air in that story. And the
Yes.
very next, I highlighted my next question that I was going to ask. And it's from Kathy in the Facebook group. And she says, "My mom said when her mom passed, what looked like a puff of smoke came out of her head, and she took it as the spirit leaving." How many times do you hear about that happening?
I've heard that before. I've not seen it. I've not had any doctors mention that to me, but I've heard that before. And after writing this book and getting some of the experiences that I've gotten, I'm not going to discount anything. I think lots of unusual things happen. And so I'm not sure what that is. Maybe that is the spirit leaving the body. I don't know. I've not experienced that myself.
I think isn't it Kubler-Ross that talked a lot about experiences with people having the puff of smoke or
Yes.
seeing things coming out of the body?
Yes.
I remember reading that. And then you also said that sometimes in a hospital, you're so close to the hereafter. It makes me wonder if since you're so close, maybe you are seeing things that are spiritual or paranormal all the time. And, there are a lot of people that say people see ghosts all the time. You just don't realize it because you expect it to look like a ghost. And it's so very real.
I think strange things happen to us that we may not realize. And again, some of these coincidental things that happen are very unusual. And when you think back in your life, think back to the coincidences that you've had, not you, but anyone. And I think we will realize that there are some things that we overlook that are unusual. Since I've written this book, I'm bumping into all kinds of things that I never realized were as spiritual as they are. And I think the doctors are having the same experience. And I hope other people do too. I hope this book and these stories help other people realize there's something else out there. There is hope. And there is someone that will guide us in the ventures that we're undertaking that are worthwhile ventures.
Karen asks a great question. She says, "Are the experiences reported to you always positive?"
The ones that I had reported to me were always positive. Now, I know there are negative spiritual experiences that people have, but none of the experiences that I had were negative. And it was interesting. I talked with some of the palliative care doctors, and the experiences that they report also when people are dying are universally positive. People get dressed to make connections with, dress up and to try to look nice because they either see people that they've have gone past before them, or they are anticipating seeing them. And so most of the experiences are incredibly positive. So I've had no negative stories reported to me at all, but I'm sure there are. I know there are.
And maybe those are the people that are unlikely to share them because they feel odd about having such a negative experience. Crystal Hope Reed, who is a previous guest on the show, along the lines of what you were just talking about, she says, "I don't have any questions, but I just read the Amazon description of the book, and I'm so happy it's out there. I got kind of teary-eyed thinking about how he might convince some people to open their minds." And she said, "Thank you, Dr. Kolbaba."
Well, that's very nice of her. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'd like people to read these stories and see how they feel themselves. So if these stories move them, and when you get closer to the hereafter, when you get closer to God, you get a sense, you get a feeling inside your body that is a warm, comfortable feeling. And if I get people to feel that warm, comfortable feeling, and they feel like they're closer to their Heavenly Father or whatever they believe, that's my goal. And I think we did that for some of the stories. You'll need some Kleenex for some of these stories. They're not sad, but they're moving.
And they suck you in.
I hope they do. Yeah.
Other than all of that, how can we find you? And I guess just what do you want to close with today?
You can find me on Amazon. Our website is physiciansuntoldstories.com. And I'd like everyone to know that it's okay to tell these stories, to tell your story, because other people will realize that the stories that they have are okay to tell too. I like people to know that there's something else out there. You can define it however you want. You can call it God or a force or a universe or whatever. I want people to know that this force loves us and looks out for us and helps us in unusual ways, so that if you have something that you're trying to accomplish, be aware that something else will help you accomplish that goal. You may not realize it at the time, but you will realize it in retrospect. I want people to realize that loved ones aren't gone forever, that they are still somewhere, and that they can, in some cases, come back and help us in unusual ways, in strange ways, and in wonderful ways. And that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Love between individuals, between family members, and love between us and our God. And so that's what I'd like people to know.
Dr. Kolbaba, it was an honor to talk to you, and I am so glad that people are excited to hear this one, and I can't wait to share this one. So thanks for what you're doing, man. You rock.
Thanks, Patrick. It's been a pleasure interviewing with you.
Joshua Black is one of the leading academic researchers in the field of dreams of the deceased. He has focused all of his graduate work, an MA and a PhD, on investigating this neglected topic. He continues to publish scientific research in the field as he finishes his PhD at Brock University in Ontario, Canada. To raise awareness about the topic, he started a website, griefdreams.ca, an Instagram page at Grief Dreams, the Grief Dreams Facebook group, and the Grief Dreams podcast with co-host Sean Ram. Additionally, he frequently gives presentations and workshops on the topic to the bereaved and those who work with them. And just a real quick note, I was a little under the weather during the interview that you're about to hear, so my voice doesn't sound like it's in tip-top shape. I felt pretty good, just didn't necessarily sound the same. And because I had a few coughing fits, you might accidentally be able to tell that I have a cough drop in my mouth a few times during the interview. But I edited the coughing fits out because you know me. Here we go. So when I first started the blog and then the podcast, it was simply out of a passion for the coolness of the paranormal. And I'd say in the last year or so, I've realized just how many listeners and Paranerd family members are out there who are grieving or who have had profound experiences after losing loved ones. And then suddenly now I feel more of a sense of responsibility sometimes to think about those people when I'm on the mic. And so that's what I think is so interesting about this topic popping up just recently. I think it's kind of an education for all of us. When your father passed away, you had your first dream involving him 3 months later. And for you to devote your work to grief support and grief dreams, I'm thinking these dreams had to be pretty powerful. Can you talk about them a little bit?
Yeah, so when my father passed away, it was the first time I ever experienced loss. And if someone would have asked me prior to that, I would have said it was it would probably feel like a bad breakup. but it's a little different. It's a lot different.
Yeah.
But for the most part, though, like when he died, I like a lot of joy came out of my life. I felt very numb. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to ask because everyone around me was grieving, like the family members and stuff. So, what do you do? So I went, as a good, male part of the society, I sucked it in and went back to school because I was doing that at the time. And, you try to just move forward, keep doing what you're doing. But the issue with that was I wasn't happy. And it was only after this dream I had of my father that when I woke up, I felt like everything has changed. Like I felt good again. I felt like joyous. I felt happy. It's like whatever was holding me back or was, clogging my senses to the world, almost like was released. And I felt this, I could breathe again. And so it was and the wild thing is I didn't tell anyone, but I felt different. And I finished my studies and I just, and I kept having these dreams every about 3 months or so that were just positive dreams for me. But I didn't really think I could actually study this stuff. Like that didn't even creep into my mind. It was just, I feel better. This is amazing. Great. And so you go do the things that you need to do in the world. But it was only after I finished my undergrad degree and I was actually planning to be a elementary school teacher. But then after my dad died, I didn't want to do that anymore. And I think the reason for that was because he wanted me to be an elementary school teacher. Because he said he liked the pensions, really. It was really good pensions. So, but when he died, like I had no desire now to be an elementary school teacher. So that was interesting. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I love helping people as much as I can. So I was going to use my experiences with grief to try to maybe help the bereaved. So when I went and volunteered with them, they kept bringing up these dreams. And I thought it was fascinating because the questions they had were different questions than I had. I didn't actually have any questions. I just experienced it and then kept moving forward. But they actually asked different questions about negative dreams. Why aren't they having dreams? What does this dream mean? All this sort of stuff. And as a good academic, I just went to the research. And there wasn't really anything I could give them that would help them out. And I was actually really shocked at that moment because we've been, dreaming since the beginning of time and people have been dying around us. So you'd think we've been having these dreams of the deceased for forever since we've been around. And yet no one has really took the reins to study this stuff. And so there has been a couple studies that, looked at the topic, like themes or something like that. But one person would do it and then they would leave. And then maybe, a couple years later, someone else would do something and they would leave. No one actually stayed in it. And none of the questions they were asking was based on what the bereaved were asking. And so it's like academics doing research that wasn't really meant to help anyone. They're just doing it because they thought it was an interesting question or something. And so when I came to, I was like, wow, I got to really do some stuff here. And, I'm not a patient man in the sense of leaving questions unanswered. I'm very critical with my thinking. I said, I wonder if I could actually do something in this area. And lo and behold, the way the world works is, in my undergrad, there wasn't really anything to do with dreams. But when I moved to a different city, there was this woman who studied dreams at a university. And I said, and there's a master's program in psychology. And I said, oh, wow, I'm going to ask her if, she'd, want to do this topic. And she did. So that was my first step into this world. But it's only once I really got in there, I saw this world totally differently. So it's been 7 years now. So I graduated my master's. Now I'm in my PhD at Brock University. And the big thing I'm finding is that there's so much judgment on this topic. There's so much hearsay, and there's a lot of bad advice people give. And a lot of people don't value the topic who work with the bereaved. And I think this is sort of one of the main things I'm doing with publishing research and my goal of publishing, because people have started only now taking it more seriously because of it being published. And there's actually research out there. Like you could have a bunch of people having these experiences, but if it's not in a reputable journal, no one cares. And I think that was the most surprising thing, because our studies are showing it's a very common experience after loss. So after we did a study after spousal loss, and was it 87% of people within the first 2 years, actually experienced one of these dreams. After pet loss, 71% after a week to 6 months. And even miscarriage, which a lot of people don't think about. But after miscarriage, partner and the carrier, about 50% of them within the first 6 months. So a lot of people are having these experiences, and we really know nothing about them.
And I've even heard you guys talk about this on your podcast a bit, the fact that in our modern culture, and I hear about this so much lately, and that is that we grieve wrong, and so that makes your job tougher, I imagine. And that takes me to support for grief support, and you also do group support. And what's that look like?
And so, like, I'm only one person, so my main goal is, like, if someone contacts me, through the website or just on the Facebook Grief Dreams Facebook group, they can pose their questions on there, and I can answer them. But for the most part, a lot of people don't have anyone to talk about these dreams with, and if they do, they get bad advice. And so this is the issue when it comes to grieving in general. Is just we're really bad at. But even people who then go seek help, those people are just not trained in this area. And if you're not trained, then you're going with your own biases. So I've had pastors who run support programs say that these dreams are from God, right? Which is amazing. Other ones say these dreams are from the devil. And so if you've had a positive dream of a deceased loved one saying they love you, and you tell this person, they're going to say that's the devil in disguise. So whatever kind of comfort you did get, they're now taken away from you, and they're making you feel scared, which is so bad because grief is hard enough on its own without you saying now, the devil's coming into your dreams, which really doesn't make any sense to begin with, because these dreams itself, just through the research I've been doing, actually help people believe in the afterlife more. So, like, why would any negative entity want you to believe more in the afterlife? It wouldn't make any sense. So anyways, so you have those people, then you have people who work with the bereaved in like different organizations where they sometimes don't value the topic, and they say, if people bring it up, they sort of change subject, or they say, go somewhere else to talk about it. And it's just, they just don't know. I've had doctors say to patients who come in saying that they had this dream, they say that, and then the doctor would say, oh, it's because of the medication. But what you're doing when you say something like that, there's no research to base that off of, actually. But what happens is now you're devaluing the experience that they had that they thought was meaningful. And so it's nice now that because I'm, my career is built in this world, that I can say no, like whatever that doctor said was incorrect, and here are the reasons why, and then provide a space for that person to then share their dream and what their concerns are, or what sometimes it's just for you to validate that they had the experience and it was meaningful to them. And so what I try to do with a lot of workshops I present is I try to train people that work with the bereaved how to look at what the research says first, but then also how to go about talking about these dreams with the bereaved. And that's something they haven't been trained on. And so, at first I was a little angry when I, had all these like negative things were popping up, but no one knows what they're doing. And so you have to say, okay, like then it's my job to teach these people. And then if they sort of go off the rails, then I can be angry at them. but for the most part, they just don't know. And like I haven't written any books yet. So a lot of it, you have to get the articles and stuff. So that's why, the website I really wanted to start was just to give people a platform to go to find me, to be able to ask the question.
You've worked with children too, right?
Yes. Yeah, so children also will dream of the deceased, and people don't know anything about that either. So the one study that did look at found 55% reported having a dream of the deceased loved one. It was a parent. So like you have to understand, like, so everyone from all ages are dreaming of their loved one, and we know nothing about these experiences. And some can be very negative and almost like you're reliving the trauma. Other ones can be very positive and transformative. And so I think the more we know about these dreams, the more we can help others as they move forward in their grief process, because it's tough enough. And then to have all these unanswered questions when it comes to this topic, it just makes it even harder. So I think this is why it's so important, because so many people are having these experiences, and a lot of them, even if they don't have these experiences, they become very concerned. And this is what I found. I didn't know this prior, but a lot of people who don't have these dreams will get worried if they're spiritual. So some people will say, like, why hasn't he contacted me? Did he even make it to heaven? Is he in hell? And, like, what's the criteria? Too much and he failed? And I was like, what? Like, are you serious? Are you really asking that question? You know, like, because you loved him, but yet you're thinking he didn't make the, the cut for heaven. Other people say, oh, like he went to heaven, but he forgot about me. You know, like I guess whatever goes on out there, they just forget what their past life. Or other people said that they're holding back their visit because they're mad at me for something that I did. Like maybe I had to sell the house because I just couldn't afford it anymore, and they're mad at me for that or something. So there's a lot of things people were like, the reasons that they were giving was very negative, and that would complicate their grief. And so this is another reason why I looked at what factors predict dreaming of the deceased in my last two studies, to give people a scientific explanation to say, maybe it's not that, like as much as we want to sort of really, put ourselves down, maybe it's not that bad, maybe it's something else. So I did a study after spousal loss and after pet loss. And what factors predicting this stuff or having these dreams was dream recall. And so this is very interesting. And a lot of people just don't, if they want to dream, they don't really question how often do they dream in general. Mm-hmm. There's so many people that have come up to me that says, I barely dream. And I said, well, if you could barely dream, what are the chances of you picking up one of these dreams? And that's what this research is showing. So it goes with the theory that we're probably dreaming of our loved ones more than we're actually remembering them. Because in a night, people probably don't even know this, we're dreaming about 50% of the time while we're sleeping, in non-REM and in REM. So we're having 4 hours of dream, and when we wake up, we may capture the last minute. So there's a lot of stuff we're not remembering, and this is still a mystery in science on why we're not remembering more dreams and why we remember the dreams that we do remember. So people have to sort of realize that, and there's ways to increase your dream recall. So that's the first way I go. So if anyone hasn't had a dream, there are ways to increase your dream recall to try to pick up one of these dreams. And that's just by valuing dreams to begin with. And you start writing them down, talking them with your friends, having a dream journal, all that sort of stuff picks up. I remember I usually get one dream a night. And I remember I started doing this just to sort of see. And I started getting 5-6 dreams a night, and it was wearing me thin, I tell you. So I stopped doing it. And then I'm back down about one dream a night. But yeah, there's different ways. I think I would go that way before, really making up some other reason on why they're not contacting you. And it's interesting too, and when I talk to a couple of mediums every now and then, and they say a lot of times if people don't get a dream, that's when they go try to see a medium to sort of reassure themselves that everything's okay.
And it's interesting. I gave a lot of our listeners the opportunity to submit questions, and there are many that came in that I plan on asking today that kind of did some work for me. And
amazing.
A lot of them fit a lot of the themes that you were just talking about that worried you or that frustrated you about the topic. I found that my listeners really, really resonate and really, really respond to any topic that mentions dreams in the first place. So I know that people will be super excited to check this one out.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there, when it comes to dreams too, especially if you try to figure out your own dreams online. Those dream dictionaries and stuff. So bad. Just because the reality is your symbolism of what things mean to you is totally different than whoever wrote the book or whoever did whatever. So it's if you love dogs and I hate dogs, well, a dog in our dream is going to be completely different, the meaning of that. So you can't really trust the online world to give you the answers that only your own mind knows. And so, the same thing with these dreams too. This is a lot easier, because if the deceased is in the dream, it probably has something to do with your loss, right? This is pretty straightforward. And even if it's a visitation dream for those people who call it, it still represents something in their waking life, because the dream reflects some aspect of maybe what you're longing for, what you're hoping to get. And the deceased knows that also. So, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you believe it's a visitation or not. These dreams are still occurring. So your spirituality has nothing to do with if you get these dreams or not. So that's another big thing that I found that a lot of people were actually very surprised with, but I really wasn't. But a lot of people are, because they thought, oh, maybe if the more spiritual I am, the more I'll get these dreams. It's not the case. Everyone's getting these dreams in different ways. And the fascinating thing about these dreams, more than anything, there's a paranormal aspect, which I'm guessing you want to talk about, but there's also the way these dreams can transform someone, like it did me. After within the loss, and mine took about 3 months, but other people it's days, and they have this dream, and all of a sudden all that negative energy or those emotions, they just go away. And it doesn't actually matter how you interpret the dream. I think the dream itself has its own healing qualities within it. I remember one woman came up to me and she said she lost her grandmother and she was just devastated prior. And then she had this dream, and in the dream she was dancing with the deceased, and she said it was the most peaceful experience she's ever seen, most joyful experience she's ever been a part of. And I said, oh, I go, did you take that as a visitation? She's like, oh, no. I was like, oh. But she's like, it was so beautiful. And I said, and she said, like, I've never had an issue with that grief ever since. I said, that's fascinating, because you don't, like, in my mind, because she didn't believe it was a visitation, but yet it transformed her anyways. And I think there's something that goes on in the dream environment. Like, it could have been a visitation, just doesn't know, right? Like I'm not here to say that. It's just like, but she didn't need to label it as a visitation to get the healing effects from it in that moment. I always look back at that. I'm like, maybe it's because, you know, in that moment, we're probably more peaceful than we've ever been. And like, maybe that's all that like the body really needs to deal with grief, is to have that peaceful moment. I think like it's kind of like meditation in a way, where you're just in that moment and there's no future, no past. You're just like embodied in this sort of, in this love. And maybe that has its own healing properties. I don't know, but it definitely makes me sort of question, you know, like the power of these dreams. I can understand why a lot of people want them. Even I had like people who are addicted to drugs, just off the wall, and then all of a sudden they have one of these dreams and then they get clean. Like, it's just like right away. Like, they didn't need to go to any 12-step program. It was just like this dream changed how they're viewing themselves and the world. So, you know, I think this is sort of the remarkable part of these dreams, is that like one dream is like 10 years of psychotherapy. It could just transform you like nothing else I've ever seen so far while I've been living.
You mentioned visitations specifically, and, you know, before I even started kind of thinking about this interview and lining up my thoughts and questions, I knew that visitations was obviously one thing that I was very interested in asking you about. And so that's why I wasn't surprised to see that Paula and Amy both had questions for you about the same thing. Paula says, and you already kind of answered this, but she said, do you believe that the deceased is actually visiting us or giving us messages in dreams? If so, do you think that we can influence the deceased to visit us in our dreams? And Amy similarly says, I've been visited by loved ones who have passed many times. Sometimes it's clear that it's them. Sometimes it's such a bizarre dream that it's hard to tell. Wondering about his perspective on this. So you have anything to kind of add to those thoughts that you were already talking about?
Yes, like I personally believe that it is possible, like just because of my own experiences and hearing some of the precog and paranormal dreams that we can share afterwards, it sort of really says that there's something else going on here. But yeah, can you influence them? I don't know, right? Like, it'd be nice if we could see all the dreams we have during the night, because you may probably said, like, you probably have more dreams of them than you remember. So can you ask them more questions? I don't know, right? Like, you would think you probably could. A lot of people say in the beginning it's about their grief. Then after their grief is sort of worked through, like, these dreams will start changing. So if it's about like a breakup, let's say you just broke up with a boy and you're having a hard time, then you'll get this visit from them and they comfort you. And so, you know, it's very interesting to see how the themes change. I think for everyone it's a little different. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's probably steps late, like in the future, of being able to ask a question and be able to get a dream right away. That'd be pretty cool. But you'll be able to understand, you know, when they're coming and be able to wake up at that point. What was the other question?
Just, you know, being able to tell the difference between a bizarre dream or if it's a clear visit from a loved one.
Yeah, in the beginning, like, it's funny, like, people ask me that all the time, like, what, you know, is this a visitation? And then and a lot of people give really bad answers in trying to tell people when a dream is a visitation and when it's not. And the issue when you start telling people when it's not a visitation or when it is, people who thought it was a visitation and it was comforting to them, they will then say, well, my dream doesn't fit into that category, so maybe it wasn't. And then they get depressed again because that dream was the thing that were hanging on to, that they were okay. So as I like to say, any dream that helps you sort of move forward in your grief and you want to call it a visitation, that's great. You know, like, the only way to really truly know is to be able to ask them. And if we could ask them, we wouldn't need a dream. so at the end of the day, it's really, you know, what does it feel? So, like, what does it feel like in your heart? And if it feels like it was, then that's great. It's amazing. But yeah, like if I wouldn't start asking people if it is, because people will give you some answers you don't want. So just, like rely on yourself for that answer. And yeah, there's, I've seen dreams where it's like one-on-one and a lot of people say those are visitations. Other times they're just in the background and people say those are visitations because the deceased is healthy and happy. Anytime it's negative, I wouldn't say that. Some people have said that a negative dream is just the deceased way of getting your attention. I don't really believe in that. Like, I don't really believe that that's what they need, because I've seen some very powerful dreams with the deceased. So usually if it's a negative dream and they're chasing you or they're dying again, well, that probably reflects some aspect of your loss that you're trying to work through and just haven't, got around to, healing from that wound yet. And so if that's the case, I wouldn't say that one is, because that doesn't actually help you as you move forward.
Before I looked at your site, I kind of had this idea that grief dreams always involved a lost loved one as an actual role in the dream, but then I learned that our loved ones don't always make an appearance. Can you give us an example of a common grief dream where our loved ones aren't directly involved?
So let's say there's like three forms. So the first one would be when the deceased loved one is just more of it's a very symbolic of your loss and what you're going through. So let's say you're running by a mountain, the mountain collapses on you and you're having a hard time breathing. Well, that's reflective of probably the difficulty you're having with the weight of the world on you in waking life. But then there's the second one, and this is sort of when people will maybe visit the hospital where the person died. They'll see an angel or God and that tells them about their loved one that has passed, that they're okay. Other times they'll find maybe letters from the deceased loved one. And so they're not actually physically in the imagery, but there's, people are talking about them or there's a letter from them. And then the last one is what everyone likes to hear, is when the deceased is actually in the imagery itself. But sometimes it's interesting. It's not always as they were. So sometimes they'll have these dreams where one dream that I collected, it was a cloud, and the cloud was the father, the deceased father, and he was talking through the cloud. And so it wasn't actually his body; it was just like cloud form. But like this is the dream world, so I guess anything's possible. Other people, it would be like an animal, and sometimes the animal represents them in a way, and sometimes the animal speaks to them. And even if you go to what they look like, sometimes people dream of the deceased in a way they've never seen before, like a healthier way. Like let's say if they had like cerebral palsy their whole life, they'll dream of them in a way where they're healthy and are walking around. And I think that is very interesting, how these dreams it's not just like a memory, because they're seeing them in ways they haven't seen them before. I think that's really fascinating.
I've had a few dreams where I felt like I was being visited by spirit, and the most profound one was after the death of my grandfather about 6 years ago. But the person who visited me in my dream was my great grandmother, so my grandpa's mother, and she died when I was a kid, and her message to me was that everything was okay. I mean, not in words, but that's what I got out of it, and it definitely stood out as a visitation dream. And I remember at the time thinking that it was super cool, first of all, that and that I was very lucky to get a dream like that. I'd never had a dream like that. But then I thought it was interesting that she visited me rather than my grandfather himself, and I'm like, well, now what does that mean?
Yeah, that's interesting when that happens, and you wonder why. And there's other times where they're all together in a group, and they're all saying hi and goodbye. So yeah, it's always fascinating on what imagery comes through and why. Was that the first time you've ever dreamt of your grandmother?
Yeah, I was really young when she died, and she was really old. She was my great grandmother, but I do have memories of her. And, but I mean, yeah, my grandfather died just 6 years ago. So it was interesting that she would be the one in a dream to kind of comfort me about it.
Yeah. Well, I guess it goes back to the angel or sometimes Jesus. I heard people, will have Jesus come in and say that the person's okay. And I don't know if it goes with people's belief systems versus, what they need. I'm not 100% sure on why the imagery is the way it is, but when it happens, they said and you feel that different quality of the dream from your other ones. It is a beautiful experience. And I wish more people could have this stuff at will. But for some reasons, like sometimes it takes 4 years, 5 years before someone actually will receive or get one of these dreams, remember one of these dreams. And sometimes you only get one dream their entire life. And I think this is the crazy thing. There's some other people, like I get one I said like probably I get 3 or 4 a year. But other people, they get one their entire life. And they treasure that dream so much. Like so many people have come up to me and say, I haven't told anyone this dream. It's been 20 years or 40 years. I wanted to share it to you. And they'll tell me this beautiful dream. And I'm like, wow, like first I'm honored for them to sort of be able to share that dream with me. But I'm
after
like really
so many years.
After so many years, yeah. But I'm sad in that they didn't trust anyone else with it. And I think this is sort of the big thing where a lot of people, if you believe the visitation, you tend to take other people's as a visitation. If you don't, then you tend to sort of put that block up saying, it's not a visitation. And so that's why you just got to allow the person to believe whatever they want to believe. And that is the only space I provide. And by doing that, people are unleashing some of these amazing stories that they just haven't, felt people could handle.
This next one I'm hoping you have some help for too, because this one broke my heart. Katie from the Big Seance Parlor says, every time my mom or dad is in my dream, they are very disappointed in me. I've been having these dreams for about 15 years, but they both passed 21 years ago, and I am still deeply affected by them every time. So, Joshua, what happens when a dreamer is not comfortable with the grief dreams that they're having, yet they continue to have them?
Yeah, so if it's a constant thing, there's something going on in the person's life. So it's not actually that they're disappointed, because that's kind of crazy. Because all the dreams I've seen that are visitation-like, I guess you could say, it's all about love. And they don't have this judgment that they would have in waking life. So if the person believes, I'm not sure if the person's spiritual or not, but if they're spiritual, it's not actually them, because a soul is more, they're non-judgmental. So if they're not spiritual or whatnot, like doesn't really matter now. So if they're not spiritual and it's just a negative experience, then I would have to actually question why it's occurring. So when it comes back to the continuity hypothesis, so these dreams, especially negative dreams, reflect our waking life circumstances. So I'm guessing there's something in Katie's life that are triggering these dreams to occur. So either it could be she's disappointed in something, or someone else is disappointed in her, which triggered these dreams. Maybe she has guilt over something. And I'm not sure if it has something to do with the loss itself and the relationship they had together. That's something I have to talk with Katie about, or it has something that's triggering her when it comes to her own guilt, like maybe a boyfriend or something that has put that guilt on her. And then you get these dreams as a sort of like a wake-up call that, you're feeling guilty. But at the end of the day, it's, you have to talk more with the person about, what that could represent, because it's not random. And that's the biggest thing to know, is that, okay, there's probably something to do with, some kind of guilt that you do have. You're feeling disappointed that you could have done better in some way. And so I would look at that first. And then the other thing to do is, what dream would you want to have if you could, given this? So if this dream were to change, how would you want that dream to go? And I think from there too, you start, rather than replaying these negative dreams, you start putting more positive images in your mind. And this is actually good for nightmares, where it's called dream rescripting. And it actually reduces the frequency of repeated nightmares just by sometimes changing the ending, or just making up a dream that's positive, where of something you actually want to have. So there's a different things you need to do. But the first thing is, if you're having it a lot, there is something the mind's trying to tell you about your waking life struggles in this world. And as I said, so if Katie wants to contact me, we can talk further about that.
Yeah, I know that when I read about dreams, or maybe even tonight, after us having this discussion about dreams that I'm likely to recall a dream anyway. And sometimes I can kind of prime a dream and kind of think of a theme or something and have, a dream. So I'm thinking maybe, like you said, maybe she can just kind of plan the dream ahead of time, script the dream ahead of time, and for a couple of nights, and see how that goes.
Yeah, and like at the end of the day, it's a lot of people, they just don't want the dream. But I think there's power in understanding why the dream's occurring. And once you get rid of that, the dream should just change on their own. So it's not like you would have to do a lot of work. Once you figure it out, it can actually be a beautiful blessing for you because it actually helps you grow to be able to understand that these negative thoughts that you're having are probably impeding your life in many different ways, not just your dream, but also your attitudes, your feelings towards others. And so by really conquering and figuring this out, then you can just be a more happier person in life and meet and give joy and love to people that you may not have been given it to just because of that energy that was blocking you.
Well, people are going to love this. I just know. And so before you leave, give us any final wisdom that you have and, kind of final thoughts. And then tell us again where they find everything about you, the site, and anything else you want to leave us with today.
Final thoughts of wisdom. Whoa. All right. Let's see what we got. Let's see.
Oh, should I have given you a heads up on that?
I'd say the one thing I've learned by looking at all these dreams and by hearing people's stories of loss is that our sense of grief stems from a part of not loving ourselves. And I think this is sort of why the deceased come so often to say they love us, because we put our love and we put our validation in other people's hands. So, boyfriend or mother, or child, like we need them to feel lovable or loved. And that's the sad thing in our society. So when those people die, it kills us inside, not because they're dead per se, but because there's now a lack of love we have for ourselves. And they were the ones feeling that in us. And so these dreams can help fill that a little bit. But I think it points to the real issue is that we need to start to learn to love ourselves more and to be kind to ourselves. And, when we stop putting our own value in other people's hands, we become more free to be able to play with our friends, to be able to do the things we need to do to them and for them. That, I think grief really shines a light on that aspect. So that's one thing I really have learned, and the wisdom I've learned from looking at these dreams is just that, if your goal in life should be to love yourself, and if you can get there, it'd be amazing to see how you view the world and how you treat others. So, that's that. But I want to, before we leave, and I want to share a paranormal dream because we haven't even shared any of the dreams I had.
Shut up. Let's do it.
All right. So this one's a precog dream, but it also talks about the afterlife, which I really like because I have no idea what the afterlife would be like, but this is kind of cool. So this is a mother who lost her daughter. And this is a dream she had. So I went down into the basement to take a shower. As I was walking towards the shower, I turned around and my daughter, deceased, and her boyfriend, who is still alive, were standing there by the basement door. I asked her, "What are you doing here?" She said her boyfriend came to say goodbye. I said, "Goodbye? Where are you going?" My daughter said, "He has to go to school like me." I reply, "Aren't you finished with school yet?" "No, Mom, it is just like it is here. You go to school, you learn something, then you move on to another school and learn more." I said, "Okay." Her boyfriend gave me a hug and said goodbye. Then they left. 2 months later, that's when the boyfriend actually died. So I had that precog dream in it, but also, which is, fascinating in itself, but it's very positive too. That's why when people say, I had these negative dreams of someone dying, well, I haven't really seen a precog like that. They're more positive, saying goodbye, that you'd get sort of after the fact. But then also about the afterlife, about like life being like school. And like why we're here as souls. Like, is this really just like a playground to try to learn to love in a state where everyone around you is angry? Like, can you love in a place where everyone is not lovable? And I think that's the goal. So I kind of like that for that reason. And then there's I got so many other ones I could share, but the other really cool one that I think really showcases the power of these dreams. Well, there's a bunch I could talk about, other precog ones, but this one I really like. And so this is about a daughter who lost her father. So in the dream, it was about my father. We talked in the dream about him and my mom, and that she needs him to come to her in the night and hug her and let her know he is there. So this is the daughter's telling, you never really see this, but the dreamer is telling the deceased what to do. Yeah, you have to go to my mom, right? Like, it's great that you're here, but like, go to her. She needs you. Anyway, so the next morning, her mom called her and thought she was crazy, but she told her that her dad finally came to her in the night and hugged her and told her that he loved her. Of course, the daughter basically said, "I told Dad to do that last night," and they both cried. So it was just amazing how they both had this dream and they both reflected almost like each other's dream, because the deceased did exactly what the daughter said. And you just sit there in the mystery of life at like looking at this, and I just have to believe these are true. Like people aren't just like giving me lies.
Right.
And if you believe that, it just makes you rethink on, what life is about and the beauty of this life, that there's so much we don't know, and to not be afraid of that, but to sit in that and actually be very kind of joyous that there's so much more we don't know.
And that one could be proof that some of these dreams really are visits.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Like they would definitely say that would be a visit.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a couple of dreams, and this is just kind of tells you a little more about my, the paranormal is cool personality, because I haven't experienced a lot of death in my life of people close to me. And so I have always been obsessed with this idea of achieving spirit communication. And, I've done a lot of paranormal investigations in the past, not so much anymore. And a lot of EVP, electronic voice phenomena, research, and, Ouija board and all of that. And I'm not always successful with it, but I'm obsessed with it and researching it. And paranormal investigators, the big thing they always want to see, the big kahuna, is seeing the apparition of a spirit, which I've never seen. I've heard some things, but I've never seen spirits. And there were 2 different dreams I've had where somebody gifted me in my dream the chance to see, it was very, very real, but it was clearly an apparition, this kind of transparent, ghostly. In one of the dreams, my dad was with me, and the second we saw it, I woke up. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I can't wait to tell everybody that I saw a ghost. And then, 5 minutes later, you're like, man, that was a dream. And then I had another where it was so interesting. I remember I was in my hometown and I'm driving down this road, and it's late at night and there, aren't too many cars around. It's a small town. And I'm driving over it's kind of a overpass that goes over railroad tracks. And I see this glowing apparition, typical movie effects, glowing apparition of this man, clearly a drunk or, stumbling across the road with, a bottle. And I remember looking at the time, and I decided that I would come back the next night at the same time to get a closer look. And I came back at the same time the next night. I remember it was kind of a stakeout. And I got real close, and I, was just kind of on the side of the road, just kind of waiting. And this, character, this ghost, starts walking across the road at the same time. I could even hear him. I got really, really, really close, and he didn't know I was there. It was the same movements, which prompted me in my dream to go back and research kind of what was around there, what was there at the time, years before. And I just remember waking up going, thank you. I may never see an apparition, but I have in my dream. What a weird thing to dream about. This is what a paranormal nerd dreams about.
That's funny. That's very interesting that you say like it's something you're longing for in waking life, and you got it in your dream world.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So I don't know who was helping me out with that or who was playing that role. Some actor on the other side's going, gosh, if I have to do one more apparition dream, gosh.
For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. And you can continue the discussion and hang out with a great community of paranerds by joining us in the Big Seance Parlor on Facebook. Want to hear your voice in a future episode? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time. Thank you to the following super paranerds who support this show at patreon.com/big seance. Jennifer Scanlon, Michael Henson, Daryl, Anne Marie Sullivan, Natalie N., Kim Robb, Josiah Lorenzo, and Susan Davey. My supporters at the Parlor guest level, who can be found at bigseance.com/parlor guests, are Allie of Hocus Pocus Collector, Anne Rekovich from OzParatech.com, Dina DeCastro of Dina DeCastro Astrology, Janae Michaels from Grey House Tarot and Farm Artifacts, Amy Park Gedicke of AmyParkG.com, Lonnie Scott from WeirdWebRadio.com, Lana and John of Carbon Lilies, Midge Munster from MidgeMunster.com, Diane Razmataz, Tracy King, Andrew Watson, Amy Taylor, Christine Rath Selhe, Mindy Kentop, Hope Battaglia, Cass and Bailey, Melissa Armour, Janet Shaw Binns, Bruce Williams, and Christopher Kohler. And I currently have 4 awesome listeners who support the show at the $10 level, which, as you know, isn't even a thing. Those awesome paranerds are Glenna Becker, Steve Skinner, James Wilfong, and Peggy Hagen. Want to know what's even better than the completely made-up $10 level? The completely made-up $20 level. And who are they? My mom and dad, Norman and Linda Keller. Thank you, paranerds.